Since the iPhone was unveiled 16 years ago, the iOS ecosystem has grown to almost 2 billion devices. However, many of the people who use them, up to a quarter in fact, have some type of disability. For instance, the CDC report I linked to in the description says that about 5% of all Americans have serious vision impairment, almost 6% have a trouble with hearing, and up to 10% find it difficult to do errands or even dress. Over the past decade, There's an app for that paradigm made it not necessary to ever leave the home, because you can work, order food, pay the bills, and do nearly everything online. At the same time, for the people who cannot leave the home or find it more difficult than you, using mobile apps per se can be a challenge. As an app developer, you have at least two incentives for paying attention to accessibility: economic and ethical. It's not hard to do the math and estimate that there are hundreds of millions of people with disabilities who use iOS devices. If you don't make your app accessible to them, you lose a huge market share. But more importantly, at least in my opinion, making apps inclusive for everyone is just the right thing to do. That's how you acknowledge the differences in the user community, and that is how you demonstrate that you value everyone equally. Let's take a look at some of the technical ways you can make your app accessible for people with disabilities. Most of the time, apps communicate with their users through visual elements, such as labels or images. Because of that, people with impaired vision are impacted in the most severe way. The first thing you want to do is provide a good support for VoiceOver, Zoom, and dynamic type. In iOS, these are the vision-oriented assistive technologies. VoiceOver is a screen reader that reads out what's happening on the screen. From what I witnessed, it is the most critical component of the app's accessibility. I'll give you a detailed overview in a second. Dynamic type plays a big role too, but its focus isn't as much on making the users able to use the apps in the first place, but rather on respecting their preferences in terms of text size, which is also a component of accessibility, As I said, VoiceOver is the most essential tool for ensuring the app's accessibility. It works by naming the UI elements which the user sees on the screen. Lucky for developers, VoiceOver is pretty easy to configure and customize. There are three main attributes which describe every element: its label, hint, and accessibility traits. What VoiceOver speaks is just a combination of these attributes. The label describes the element's content, such as the text in a label, the name of an image, and so on. The hint gives additional context, which may not be obvious when you don't see the screen. And the traits are basically just flags which specify some characteristics of the element and its behavior. For example, what type it is, whether it can be tapped or clicked, how the user can interact with it, and so on. Here's a short demonstration where you can hear a typical VoiceOver description. It may sound pretty fast because I'm kind of familiar with VoiceOver. I use it from time to time to analyze the user experience of different apps, but believe me, it's not nearly as fast as it can be.
Favorite button. Tap to add to favorites.
You heard all the three elements: favorite, which is the label; button, which is the trait describing the element's type; and tap to add to favorites, which is the hint. There are a couple more attributes which are suitable for specific cases. For example, when you use a slider, you want VoiceOver to speak the current value. All the UI elements that come out of the box in iOS work pretty seamlessly with VoiceOver. But when you build a view from scratch, like the one I just demonstrated, you gotta make sure it provides the same set of data to VoiceOver. Oftentimes, custom UI elements are the central part of the app experience. You create them because you want the UI to communicate your app's unique look and feel. In situations like this, you may need to adjust some settings, and it's very easy to do. If you build the UI in Interface Builder, you can set the accessibility attributes in the inspector. In UIKit, all views have the accessibility properties, so you can set and update them dynamically. The same is true for SwiftUI, though method names seem to change in each new version. And of course, you can localize the values for different languages. Images can be made accessible the same way. You provide alternate descriptions in the accessibility labels. Working with images, however, is more complicated, especially when it comes to downloading them over the network. With text, you can get anything and just read it for the user. Images, in contrast, are not self-describing, so you have two ways to deal with them. First, you can get the description alongside the image. You may have seen Twitter or Instagram suggest that you add a description when you post a photo. That is the most accurate way, but it adds more work to do. An alternative approach is relying on image recognition in iOS. A couple versions ago, VoiceOver gained the ability to describe images displayed on the screen. It's not always accurate, but in many cases it does the trick. Take a look and judge for yourself.
A stone arch with a green and purple aurora in the sky. A galaxy surrounded by stars in space. An image of a pyramid under a starry sky. A group of buildings under a cloudy sky. Northern lights in the sky at night. Northern lights in the sky at night. A rainbow in the sky above a rocky object. A black and white image of a planet. An image of a star-filled night sky. An illustration of a planet with text on it. An illustration of the moon with text. No description available. No description available.
By the way, it's an app I created called Space Photos, and you can check it out at the link below. As you can see, VoiceOver works pretty well for describing simple subjects, but of course it's not as detailed as a description written by a human. In that sense, the photo's title and explanation provide more context. These were the most important things to know about VoiceOver. In this video's description, you'll find links which can help you adopt it in your app. Next is dynamic type. From the user's perspective, it's just a slider in settings, which sets the preferred text size across apps. From the developer's point of view, dynamic type is also easy to work with. Instead of using fixed font sizes, you use semantic text styles such as headline or subtitle. iOS then determines the most appropriate font size based on user preferences. Of course, you'll find a link to detailed documentation in the description. To test your app with these assistive technologies, just turn them on in settings and see how your app behaves. Another thing to mention is colors and contrast. Not everyone can see colors. Because of that, your app should not rely on them for conveying important messages. Think about why a traffic light has separate sections for red, amber, and green. Make sure your app's UI elements are clear to understand even when they have the same color. Next, consider accessibility for people with hearing impairments. It's mostly relevant for media-centered apps, so I won't go into as much detail. Also because there aren't many special things you can do in terms of software development. The rules are roughly the same for apps, websites, and let's say YouTube videos. Add captions and make sure that sound is never the only way you communicate information with. So pay extra attention to sounds you use for alerts and notifications inside the app. You can easily test how accessible your content is just by muting the sound. Speaking of YouTube videos, you may have noticed that all my vids have proper captions. I add them for two reasons. The first one I just explained, and the second, since I'm not a native English speaker, I realize I can make mistakes, even though I do my best to sound as good as possible. But if you need captions, just be aware that they exist and they're good. I check them for accuracy. Besides vision and hearing, the users of your app may have other kinds of disabilities, such as those related to the motor functions or cognition. I didn't cover them today because this video is already too long. No, actually because these are much more nuanced topics and the technical solutions I showed you may not be enough. In many cases, you'll need to add, remove or reorder entire screens of your app. Let me know in the comments whether you need such a follow-up video. I can make it, but it would require more research. There are many reasons to adapt your app for users with disabilities, or just make it more accessible to everyone. For instance, I sometimes use VoiceOver just because I'm really tired and don't want to stress my eyes even further. And my parents, maybe yours too, benefit from using a larger text size in apps. And keep in mind that by making your apps inclusive for everyone, you not only show respect for the users, but also get an opportunity to reach more of them. That is why I consider supporting accessibility an essential part of app development. That marks the end of this video. I hope that you learned something useful today. If that's so, please hit the like button and maybe even share the link with someone. Also, I wonder how important accessibility is at your company or in your project, so let me know in the comments. And it would be extra great if you shared some tips that I didn't cover in this video. Subscribe to the Swift Bird and make your apps fly. Thanks for watching. I'll see you later.